Hello, welcome to today's webcast series presentation, Overcome Anchor Design Challenges with PROFIS Engineering Suite. My name is Beth Brooks. I'm the Director of Civil and Structural Engineer Media. Thank you for joining this webcast, which is sponsored by Hilti. Before we begin today's presentation, first some general information about the webcast and the GoToWebcast platform. The views of the speakers and organizations participating in this webcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Civil and Structural Engineer or its publisher, Zweig Group. If you have any technical difficulties while viewing this webcast, please submit questions or a brief explanation of your technical problem using the Question tab on GoToWebinar control panel, and a representative will assist you. During the webcast, you can also submit questions to our speaker using the same Question tab. Submit your questions at any time, and we will try to answer as many as we can later in the webcast. Zweig Group encourages group learning for our events. If you are viewing the live webcast with a group on one registered person's computer, that person must complete and submit the multiple viewer registration form for the group in order for everyone to earn credit. Download the multiple viewer registration form from the Handouts tab on the control panel. Submission instructions are on the form. Today's presenters, Alexis Clark. Alexis Clark is the Structural Engineering Trade Manager for Hilti North America and is responsible for the engagement of the structural engineering community of the US and Canada through the development of continuing education, fastening products, services, and software. Since joining Hilti in 2014 as a structural field engineer in Texas, Alexis has been involved with the development of PROFIS engineering design software and has served as a program leader, speaker, and moderator at multiple industry conferences, including Structures Congress and NASCC Steel Conference. Alexis is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Texas and graduated from the University of Texas at Austin in 2014 with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, where her studies focused on concrete materials and forensic engineering. In her spare time, Alexis enjoys cooking, painting, sand volleyball, and travel with her family. We also have Eric Wheeler. Eric Wheeler is a senior associate with Thornton Tomasetti, Inc. and member of their renewal practice in Chicago, Illinois. He is responsible for managing all phases of building design projects and mentoring junior staff. Eric has over 10 years of experience in structural renovation and new construction projects, including investigation of existing structures. His portfolio includes higher education, commercial, cultural, residential, and critical facilities. Eric is familiar with a variety of modern and archaic building types and their behavior. Eric is a licensed structural engineer in the state of Illinois. He graduated from Tennessee State University in 2002 with a Bachelor of Science in Architectural Engineering. Eric earned a Master's of Science in Civil Engineering with a focus on structures from Purdue University in 2007. In his free time, Eric enjoys spending time with his family, drawing, and photography. And at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Alexis.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for those wonderful introductions, Beth. And I'm now looking forward to sharing a little bit of an interview with Eric Wheeler. So before we jump straight into the interview that I'm really excited to hear about, can you tell us a little bit more about Thornton Tomasetti, this company that you work for?
Sure. So Thornton Tomasetti is a 1,500-person engineering firm. Our headquarters are based in New York City. We offer design, investigation, and analysis services on a variety of building and non-building projects. If you take a look at the slide, The image on the right-hand slide shows a variety of services that Thornton Tomasetti offers. As mentioned before, I do work in the Chicago office, and I've spent the past 12 years in the renewal group. And the primary products that I work on include adaptive reuse, renovation, and vertical expansion projects on top of existing structures.
Awesome. And I had to help you brag a little bit here for a second. Isn't Thornton Tomasetti pretty consistently on ENR's top 100 design firms list?
That is correct.
Wonderful. Well, we're glad to have such an esteemed guest with us today. So now that we understand a little bit more about the company and the group that you work with specifically, can you explain some of the roles and responsibilities that you have in general as an engineer and in your daily tasks?
Sure. My ultimate responsibility as a structural engineer is to hold paramount the health and safety of the public. I would say my business responsibilities are twofold. Ensure we deliver products that meet the client's expectations, but also ensure that myself and my team complete projects within the agreed upon consultant engineering fee. So I manage a team of structural engineers on a variety of different projects. I provide guidance and mentorship for them from project start to project finish. My day-to-day involves primarily addressing their concerns, but also providing them with the resources they need to complete a task. In addition to supporting my team, I also help architects, owners, and contractors by providing structural solutions that help solve their challenging design problems.
Perfect. That sounds like there's a lot of responsibilities that you have.
Yeah.
It's good. They got to keep you busy. So throughout your daily tasks and overarching with the team that you work with at Thornton Tomasetti, what Hilti software products have you used?
So I would say overall, what I've seen in Chicago is we've used PROFIS Engineering and PROFIS Rebar. I use PROFIS Engineering primarily when I need to connect, for example, structural steel elements to composite metal deck, concrete, or different types of masonry substrates. I use PROFIS Rebar when I need to connect new structural concrete elements to existing concrete elements. And PROFIS Rebar really is a great tool when the mechanism in which you're trying to transfer forces needs to be done in the form of shear friction.
Perfect. That was such a great explanation of the differences and why you would maybe want to use PROFIS Engineering Suite or PROFIS Rebar for different applications. So as someone who works with Thornton Tomasetti across the US and Canada, I do understand that different Thornton Tomasetti offices also use PROFIS DF diaphragm, which is for the attachment of deck to the steel framing below, and also use PROFIS anchor channel, specifically out of the New York office, I believe, to design facade attachment to the face of a building. So as today's webinar focuses specifically on PROFIS Engineering Suite, I'm curious, how did you become familiar with the software?
Sure. So last year, Hilti's lead field engineer in Chicago, Nishan, visited my office, and he met with myself and several colleagues and asked us what new features we would like to really see in the software. So we reach out to Nishan on a regular basis for the type of projects that I do work on, primarily to understand what are good applications for their anchors into various types of material substrates. I believe our strongest requests are attaching to composite metal deck, as well as different types of masonry. So upon hearing our feedback, Nishan indicated that in the next generation of Hilti software, they would include the features that we requested, and those features are now shown within the PROFIS Engineering Suite.
That's awesome. I'm glad that obviously your feedback was taken through to Sean to confirm that was coming in the future generations. And I'm excited to share that throughout my time at Hilti, both as a field engineer and in the structural engineering trade manager role, I've got to be a part of the development of PROFIS engineering. One of the things I enjoyed being a part of in the field was that, just like Nishan is your field engineer, I actually got to work with several of my clients in my territory who were charter customers to help us develop what this next generation looked like. So we directly listened to their feedback, their needs, their pain points, and developed a product that would be useful in addressing those different needs. We call these charter customers. And although I did not do it with them directly, Thornton Tomasetti, New York City, and Dallas offices were both two of those 24 charter customers that we worked with. I understand that for Thornton Tomasetti Dallas, we had a lot of feedback specifically about the frustration of having to enter factory load and in different combinations and in multiple load combinations. They had the request to specifically be able to input loads however they wanted to, and that they wanted to run those loads simultaneously and let the software take the determination of which combination governs off their hands. Another thing that we heard from them is they saw a huge benefit to including base plate analysis directly into PROFIS Engineering as a feature so that they wouldn't have to juggle back and forth the different load cases, different anchor design going back and forth between RESA and RAM software that they were at the time using. And just like you mentioned, I understand that the New York City office had the same request to add additional base materials outside of just anchoring to concrete. So now I really want to dive in, and I'd love for you to share with our audience some of the different project types and applications that you've personally used PROFIS Engineering Suite to design.
Sure. So I use PROFIS engineering software on a lot of my tenant renovation projects. The image on the left-hand side of the slide shows the attachment of a guardrail post to existing composite metal deck. We use Hilti QuickBolt TZ expansion anchors when making the attachment. And we use the PROFIS Engineering Suite software to design the anchors for the tension and shears due to applied loads on the guardrail. We've also used this software on a lot of building renovation projects. The image on the right-hand side of the slide shows the attachment of a new W33 welder to an existing 30-inch thick slurry wall. We designed the welder to brace the slurry wall, and we used PROFIS Engineering Suite to design the anchor group to transfer shears from the existing slurry wall to the new W33 welder.
So when you designed this, was your first design that you had put into the software working?
No, we actually had to go through a couple different iterations to come up with an anchor group layout that would work, and also met the site constraints of what the contractor encountered in the field. There is rebar in the existing slurry wall, so we did have to make some adjustments to the anchor group layout to accommodate the design.
Gotcha. Thank you for explaining that.
More recently, I used the software to attach a new steel beam to an existing concrete wall using a plate and a shear tab. I used the premium features of the software to design the base plate or check the base plate for stresses based on AISC's Steel Design Guide 1. I also used the features in the software to evaluate these stresses on the concrete to ensure they were within acceptable levels.
Excellent. And when you talk about acceptable levels, are those levels that you input yourself? Are these engineering judgments that you're making, or are you referencing a specific code?
No, we're actually referencing ACI 318. We're following the provisions of bearing on concrete, and that's what we based our decisions on.
Perfect, thank you. So you've been kind enough to share some of the different projects and applications that you've used PROFIS Engineering on already. I'm curious, now that you've kind of shared a little bit here and there, what are those favorite features you just love using?
So the favorite features in the software that I really enjoy are the new base materials. As was mentioned before, we deal a lot with composite metal deck and different types of masonry substrates. So for those to be included in the new software is great. I also enjoy the new load engine. Previously or prior to this, you had to actually compute your factory design forces and then input them into the software for each load combination. With this new version, you can update or import your unfactored loads, select the appropriate load combinations, and then the software will check the anchor group for all the various load combinations that you selected.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that those features have been really useful to you, and hopefully those who are in our audience can recognize that those were some of the direct and most commonly requested must-have features that we heard from our different charter members in that phase of development. So now the dreaded question. Before you had PROFIS Engineering, how did you execute these tasks?
That's a good question. So before using any of the PROFIS software, I used to actually determine the capacity of anchor groups by hand calculations, or I would develop MathCAD sheets to perform the calculations for me. So if the anchor groups were in a 2x2 or a 3x2 anchor pattern, the calculations were very straightforward. However, for the type of work that I do, it's very rarely occurs. So for example, there may be, if I'm embedding into a concrete slab, there's rebar that's cast into the slab. It may impede the installation of an anchor. And what happens is you have a very irregular anchor pattern, which is shown in the photo for one example in one of my projects, where we had to really have a very unique configuration to meet the demands of the field constraints. So if I were to perform this calculation by hand, it would be very lengthy and very consuming in our time. So that's the challenging part for these irregular anchor patterns.
I have a feeling that there are many of our audience members who saw both this picture to the left and the calculations to the right and automatically groaned, because this is a pretty common happenstance, right?
That's correct.
How often before PROFIS Engineering would you say you had something that wasn't a standard configuration? And I recognize that because you work in this rehabilitation and repair sector, that it might be a little bit more common, but even then, we have some engineers who are on the line who may be designing only new construction. And as most of us know, we often have that one guy in the tractor who is probably getting 10 points per anchor every one he hits it's a cast in. So of the time that you're designing anchors, how often are they in either a pretty standard digestible anchor configuration, and how often are you seeing something like as fun as this, we'll say?
Well, to see something this extreme is relatively rare, but we do encounter quite a bit where we have an irregular anchor layout pattern that we really have to respond to, especially when the contractor starts drilling in the field. They may do all the scanning. They'll indicate or they'll find there's rebars that are within locations where anchors are supposed to be located. And we'll have to make adjustments on the fly, more or less, to make the construction work and keep the project moving forward.
So if something changes and this configuration on the left doesn't end up happening, do you guys get to rewrite all those calculations?
Unfortunately, yes, if you heard that groan in my voice.
Perfect. I know we've all been there before, so I have to tease a little bit that unfortunately we've had to do this for a long time. So now that you're using PROFIS Engineering, how is it making not only your job, but your team more efficient?
So PROFIS Engineering allows me to look at various anchor groups very quickly with different types of anchors and different types of anchor embedments. So for example, let's say a contractor reaches out to me and says a group of anchors or one anchor is affected by some existing embedment within the concrete. I can take their feedback, go back to my office, talk to my team, and come up with an alternate detail and still have minimum impact on the construction schedule. So the way I see it with the software is it really reduces the amount of time I have to compute or to develop a design up to 75% compared to if I had to do it by hand.
Awesome. And do you find also that this is hopefully improving? You mentioned reducing the design time, which of course I would hope increases the efficiency of your team overall. But when it comes to accuracy, and I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the reduction of design time because you're not having to check every additional footnote and every single spacing factor. Do you feel more confident in the final product that your team produces because they're using this software? Are you happy with the result, the transparent calculations? How do you feel about the accuracy of your designs moving forward?
No, I feel very comfortable with the accuracy of the design results. So with using tables, we usually have to make some decisions about what we encounter in the field. They may be uncommon site considerations that we may need to take in consideration. So by using the software, it allows, I think, It improves accuracy, but also consistency in how we approach the design of various anchor groups for post-installed anchors.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Thank you for explaining a little bit more fully on that one. So I'm happy to hear that you have these beliefs because after launching PROFIS Engineering Suite, we ran a third-party anonymous survey with over 500 design engineers globally, and we received very similar feedback. So one of the things that we did here was that we were able to reduce design time. And when we talk about reduction of design time in this particular question, it had to do with the ability to design a group of anchors, like you mentioned, regardless of base material, whether they were spending 2 hours to design a masonry connection or an hour and a half to design concrete over metal deck, regardless of whatever it was, and regardless of the base material, they were comfortable developing a reliable connection within 5 minutes, which was really awesome to hear. And you mentioned, you may have to reiterate that same design in one of those new base materials multiple times if things change on the job site or if demands have changed based on something that's happened to the project. And the ability to consistently reduce iteration time, I think, has even a more compounding effect to your overall efficiency. We also had information about the improvement of accuracy. And when we talk about this, I think a lot of us automatically jump to, well, it's an anchor design software. It must be the accuracy of just the anchors that you're designing. And while we sincerely hope that is true and we believe it, and it's one of the reasons we provide such a transparent design report so you can thoroughly check the references, those code provisions, some other ways in which we had feedback that there was increased accuracy is the ability to check against other ESRs. So I'm going to give an example of connecting to concrete over metal deck. In traditional design, you're not only designing the anchors, you have to make sure that those anchors have been tested in a specific deck profile and concrete thickness that matches those different deck manufacturers. And as we'll show later in our demonstration, there are several different ways in which we've taken the guesswork out of having to do all those labor-intensive whether it's a geometry check or a footnote check out of the design process. Additionally, we heard that we had improved accuracy through the various methods of base plate analysis, and I won't get too far into that because I want to save some of the surprise for the demonstration, but we have really introduced what I believe to be true engineering features to the software, to where you as a designer use your engineering judgment to make a call on whether or not you feel comfortable with the design of not only the anchors, but the connection as a whole when we include the base plate. And lastly, we heard about the increased efficiency of not just the anchor calculation, as we mentioned in the first bit of feedback, but the overall connection when we do, of course, again, add in that base plate analysis directly into the software, removing one more step of going from structural analysis software to anchor software to structural analysis software or a modeling system, but being able to really integrate and see a smoother workflow for their team overall. So my question to you is, and this can kind of be outside of the PROFIS engineering realm, but in general, how do you feel about the value that Hilti provides to the Thornton Tomasetti team?
Sure. So for a variety of projects that I work on, we usually require some type of input or encounter some condition that's not reflected anywhere. And so what I really appreciate with Hilti is I can reach out to their lead field engineer, Nishan, reach out to him, ask him questions about our site constraints, ask him what anchor he would recommend. And if he doesn't know the answer, he can connect me with the right individuals within the Hilti family to provide me with the answers that I need. I would say also using the software, if we have certain feedback about the software or if we have any requests on what we would like to see in the software, he's very responsive. He really considers our input and is able to share that feedback with those individuals a part of Hilti who can incorporate or be mindful of the requests that we would like to really see in the software in the near future.
I love that. I'm so glad to hear that. I know Nishan personally. He's kind of a hero to me. I'll go beyond mentor. He's a hero. He's been with Hilti for a long time. He's incredibly knowledgeable, and he is very reachable and always willing to help. And I would encourage our audience members that if you haven't met your Hilti engineer, they're not a salesperson, they are a technical representative in your area, and they are there to hopefully answer the phone when you have those difficult questions. And you get a picture from the contractor that you've never seen in one of your design books before, because I have a whole bunch of grins around the table right now, because we've all seen that before. So I'm glad that you see Hilti as kind of a teammate to get you through some of those tough times, because that's one of the things that we try to do here, is bring value to our structural engineers beyond just software and beyond data tables, but to also make sure that your entire project workflow goes successfully, because we believe in reliable connections and making sure that the job gets done correctly. So with that, I want to say thank you again to Eric Wheeler for joining us today. We've asked for plenty of his time. He's been so wonderful in providing his feedback, not only to Nishan in what he would like to see in future iterations of our software, but also to us in this process. So thank you again for joining.
And you're welcome, Alexis.
Awesome. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our audience to PROFIS Engineering Suite. If you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, it is available at profisengineering.hilti.com. You can type it directly into your browser. For those of our audience members who are familiar with PROFIS Anchor, you will notice when I go through the demo that there's a lot of this that still has that familiar feel, that makes it feel like your typical Anchor design software. But hopefully you've noticed by now we've added a few bells and whistles, to say the least. One thing that is really exciting is that the entire platform has moved to the cloud. And I know we have some people across different geographies, whether you're in the US or Canada. This is a global software, so it does comply with every international privacy law that we have the software in, which is over 120 countries that we continuously roll out to. But the reason we moved to a cloud-based software, and you've probably noticed this is a growing trend in the structural engineering industry and the construction industry in general, is that the move to a cloud-based software allows us to provide you instant updates. If you have PROFIS Anchor currently downloaded to your computer, you're probably really familiar with that little hover bubble that pops up in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that says PROFIS Anchor has updated, which is great because we want you to have updated information. But if you haven't rebooted your computer, or if you haven't integrated those new changes, you may be using not only outdated software and maybe missing features and functionality, but you may also be using outdated technical information. And of course, we want to make sure that those designs that you're executing are using the most current and reliable data. We do, of course, have our anchoring to concrete module, which you'll be familiar with if you're a user of PROFIS Anchor in the past. And we have those additional features that Eric has talked about so eloquently, as well as the ones that I'm about to show you right now. So I did mention that we have, of course, several users in the audience that are likely people who have used our PROFIS Anchor desktop software in the past. Everything that you currently use in PROFIS Anchor is available in PROFIS Engineering Suite Standard and completely free of charge. So we're not going to remove any of the functionality we would have offered you with PROFIS Anchor. And you have not only the added benefit of moving to the cloud, but a couple of small helpful things that have been improved upon in that standard version. All of the additional features, including our 2 new base materials, the integration of base plate analysis, and the load engine are all available in the premium version, and that is an upgraded version from the standard. And there are different types of subscriptions that you can enroll for that allow you either standard, floating, enterprise, whatever it is that you need for your team. And with that, I'm going to open up my browser really quick, and we're going to dive right in. So you'll notice that I'm on my browser, and I have the ability to automatically log in. I mentioned that the website you want to go to is profisengineering.hilti.com, and it takes you directly to the site. I am actually going to be using Jennifer Ray's login today. She's our product manager for the software. If you're a new user, you can register down here at the bottom. And if you're a returning user, or if you have already registered for PROFIS Anchor downloadable software, you should be able to use the same login here. So I click login, I see my 4 friendly bars that say help is around the corner, and I get to my home screen. And you're gonna notice that this home screen is very unfamiliar if you haven't been in the software before. So we see a couple of new panels on the left and the right. We see new different types of anchor design modules. We see our anchoring to concrete, masonry, and concrete over metal deck. We see a handy dandy link to the PROFIS rebar software that Eric mentioned he's used in the past. And I'm gonna start by hopping up to our settings situation, our menu in the top right corner. If you are looking to manage your account, whether you add new users, remove new users, get a different type of license subscription, want to renew your subscription, you can do that in the right-hand corner. And to the left, our menu will bring us to the settings tab. And this is every engineer's favorite tab because it's really important. You want to make sure everything is correct, but there's, again, additional things we want to make sure are correct. So of course, start with your region. I'm not going to choose Canada for today, but you'd want to choose wherever you are. You can set your interaction settings for however you want to move your GUI or graphic user interface. Default parameters are always very important. We will get into this a little later when we dive into base plate analysis, but you have the ability to set all of your own preferences. Of course, we have different preferences for our anchoring to concrete module. That's one of the big things you'll want to check is the building code that you want to design to. Typically, it's the latest. When we look at anchoring to masonry, we have the ability to, of course, change not only the design method, but the different units. And same for our concrete to metal deck attachment. And I can go in, choose different temperature, stress, all of these different dimensions that I want to set as my preferences. So once I save, we see that I can open existing files on the right-hand side. You'll be very happy to know that PROFIS anchor files are back compatible and that you can open those in PROFIS Engineering. So you didn't just lose all of your old work in PROFIS Anchor. I also have the ability, one nice feature of moving to the cloud is we have project storage, access, and sharing that was not available with PROFIS Anchor. So I have the ability to not only create new project files, I can, of course, share those with other people who are users on the platform. So I'm going to go ahead and share this with myself. And I can add me as a user, one of my trusted confidants on this specific project. We can see that I've added myself, and I also have the date that I added. And if I need to later on, because Alexis no longer deserves rights to this, I can remove her from that project as well. So the person who begins the project is going to be, of course, the project owner. Now, what if I have a new company that or project or company name that I need to start? I can input a new one, enter, and I'll see it come to the bottom. I can click on those 3 menu buttons. I can either archive or delete these different projects. So you have the ability to flexibly move those however you need. And then some people say, but the cloud, what happens if my browser times out or if I accidentally X out of the browser? What's nice is that actually every design move that you've made will be saved in a draft. So let's say I forgot about a project or I did a design and I didn't put it into the right project folder originally. I can either click and drag directly into that project folder, which is really nice. You see we also have subfolders under those projects if you need additional organization. I can also change which project they belong to under the design settings. So you see I went into my drafts, I clicked the design settings, and I now have the option to not only change the name, but add it to a specific project folder. Can save that, and then automatically, because we're on the cloud and everything updates nicely, I can actually search for that project, and it will open up. So now I'll go ahead and dive right into our anchoring to concrete module. So again, if you're from PROFIS Anchor, if you're a former user, you probably are very familiar with the way this is set up. But what you may be missing is those banners at the top. And I know a lot of engineers love having the banners at the top. And we'll talk about that in a moment and where those buttons have gone. So we do have a nice graphic interface, a little bit more cleaned up. A couple of nice bells and whistles is I can double click the edges of my concrete and it will actually make it a finite number, which I can then change. You used to have to toggle it on and off, which is a little bit frustrating. Just like in old PROFIS Anchor, I have the ability to update all of the geometric features directly on the graphic user interface. I can change the dimensions of my plate if I need to. And you'll notice on the right, we have that results panel. It will, of course, have messages there as well. So if there's anything that's incorrect or if there's a code provision that needs to be considered, you'll want to make sure you reference those little yellow boxes that come up and give you warnings. Now, we mentioned that we had users who described wanting to have different ways we could input loads. And of course, one of the things we didn't want to take away from PROFIS Anchor is the ability to input loads and change them directly on the graphic user interface. And as I do that, that results panel on the right is going to show me whether my tension, shear, and combination have been used over capacity. And of course, I can break those down to see what those different failure modes are. So all those banners I mentioned that used to be at the top are now on your left. We go from bottom to top, so base material, I'm now in plate. We then go to the anchors. I can then move on to the profile and then the loads. So I hope everyone kind of sees that we're building up from the foundation and all the way up. Now, we had feedback that a lot of people said, well, the banner is nice at the top, but really I only use a few different functionalities in that banner. Well, what we've done is added a favorites tab. So you've noticed this new star tab. It's fully customizable, so you can actually move these up and down as you see as priority, which is really handy. And if you deem that you no longer need one of those features, you just unstar and they'll remove and go back to those original banners on the left. So now I'm going to show you guys that base plate analysis. So if you're using PROFIS Anchor or another anchor design software, the only option that's currently available on the market is going to be the rigid base plate assumption, which is effectively using strain compatibility and doesn't assume that the base plate will take any of the loads. So all of the loads are put onto the anchors, giving you a conservative, but maybe a little bit too conservative of an estimate. I now can use Design Guide 1, and as you'll see on that results pane, I have the results of my Design Guide 1 calculation. Of course, they'll either both be green or both be red, because if you've overutilized your moment, you will need to increase the thickness of your base plate. And what's really nice is it does update in real time. Now, it's not always reasonable for us to assume that our plate actually does behave in a rigid manner, because it may not be linear elastic. So we've actually partnered with Idea Statica to introduce component-based finite element analysis directly into the software. So I'm going to increase my forces. I click calculate. It's going to take a minute to run all of those iterations across the different nodes, and I get this beautiful output. So I can see here that I have differences between a rigid assumption and a non-rigid assumption. I can look back and forth between deformation, plastic strain, and concrete stresses to see those different pressures and different stresses across different elements of the connection. And what's most important is at this point, I'm using true engineering judgment to make the determination if my plastic strain and my deformation, both theoretically calculated, are close enough to my assumption of a 0 plastic strain in a rigid base plate that I feel comfortable using more accurate forces on each of those anchors, which we see on the right, rather than the rigid assumption that we see on the left. And if I do feel comfortable making that assumption, if in this case I say 0.21 inches is close enough to the assumption of 0 that I feel comfortable using these, I click confirm to proceed with those new load values. And you'll see now that my results reflect those greater tensions that have been placed on those 4 anchors. I'm going to really quickly revert back to rigid, and now I'm excited to show you guys about this load engine. So I'll go ahead and skip over this really quick. We mentioned earlier that you guys shouldn't have to do factoring of each of your different loads and then put each of them into PROFIS Anchor like you do now. A lot of additional legwork that has to be done by the user. So we've actually included all of the different IBC loads that are available. You can then go in and select which one apply to this specific configuration. And now I can input my shear in the X, the shear in the Y, tension, my different moments as they relate to these different load types. And we're going to let PROFIS Engineering actually do all of the legwork for us, because why not take that step out of the anchor design process? So I'll just go ahead and add a few more loads in here. Okay. And then I click save. So what's going to happen is I've actually had those equations show up at the bottom. I can see the loads that I've input. And what's really nice is that the software is not only going to calculate those, but it'll tell you by bolding which of these is most is governing the actual configuration. I do have brand new functionality that is actually only a few weeks available to the market, because we had automatic feedback once we released earlier this spring that this was important, to generate your own load combinations, which is really nice. So I now can put in custom factored loads, and those will be calculated as well. Click go. Can put in a second. And again, when I have both of these in here, the load combination, let me put these in, the load combination that has the highest amount of utilized capacity is going to govern. And when I click go, we're going to see that it tells me which one that is, which can be really useful. Awesome. Another really helpful thing that we've heard about is you guys use structural analysis software to design your buildings, and you're extracting all of those loads out of the structural analysis software, obviously available in a tabular format, and you'd like to run all of those load combinations simultaneously. So we've added the functionality to where you can just copy and paste directly from that spreadsheet into the software. And oh no, what if my structural analysis software has different headings, different column headings than PROFIS Engineering? What's nice is you actually have the opportunity to change them directly in the software, and you'll notice that when I did that and I chose negative shear in the X direction, it removed it from one of the other columns, so you can't have multiple columns with the same value. I can go in and select either static or seismic. You'll also notice when I stop over these, there's some nice hover bubbles to help you out. And sometimes PROFIS Engineering and your output may not have the same units, so of course you can change that as well. I click apply, and all of my load combinations are there. And actually our product manager was trying to figure out how many we could run simultaneously. And we tried 500 lines, and PROFIS Engineering calculated them all. So until now, we haven't found out where the ceiling is. So if you find out first, let me know, send me an email. And of course, once again, when I have those different loads, it will tell me which one governs. I now have a what I like to call a smart filter for our anchors. So typical to PROFIS Anchor, you can run all anchors, calculate all anchors. It now will tell you if it doesn't work, why it doesn't work, which is kind of nice if you just hover your mouse over it. But sometimes I don't need to see all these extra things. So I can actually go up to this left-hand side and click exclude failures, and it will only show me the anchor configurations that are feasible and meet the demands of this configuration, which is really slick, because why deal with things that aren't going to work, right? Who has time for that? I can also remove all inactive cases. So after I run my different combinations, and I've determined which one governs, I can just simplify it down to that one. Now I have my anchor configuration, and I generate a report. If you've used PROFIS Anchor in the past, you're probably really familiar with this really nice documentation tool. But what you'll see now is that we've added some additional customization to your design reports. So you have the ability to denote which anchor, which specific connection it is. If you had to make engineering judgments and you need to add notes directly into certain sections, you can add those as well for your own documentation or for a calculation package that you may need to submit to someone else. I save and generate. Of course, I can download the file. I'm a happy camper. And you'll notice that all of those notes that you've put in directly into the software are available right there. Whoops, sorry, I went past. Right there in the column headers and at the top of each of these pages. Some additional functionality that we have is that you can actually add in your company logo as well if that is something that you'd like to do. That's something that we had requested specifically from many of our European partners. And I have some people who say, I don't want to save everything to the cloud. I like having things on my desktop. Perfect. You can save all of these files directly onto your desktop as well and have them to reference later. So now we'll hit the home button really quick and go back to our home screen. If I hadn't saved that, it would have saved as a draft. Don't worry, I know some of us gasped. And now we'll go ahead and jump right into anchoring to Masonry. And this is where all of my East Coasters say, thank goodness, finally, we have a full 3D graphic user interface for Masonry anchor design, which makes me very happy too. I think it's beautiful. So obviously we have this nice user interface that you can play with. We have multiple base materials for you to use. So if I click Hollow CMU, all of those happy notes that we want to make sure we take into consideration, my smart filter will actually only show me the anchors that have been tested and have published data in that configuration. So for this situation, HY270 has documentation, and that's what I'll be able to use. If I choose hollow brick, ooh, it always gets me excited to see hollow brick. My anchor, smart anchor filter does the exact same thing. Again, it will only show me the anchors that are applicable in that configuration. Just like in our anchoring to concrete GUI, I have the ability to input loads directly onto the interface. Another request that we had was the visibility into the reports that these were referencing or the technical data it was referencing. So if you're still very much attached to your Hilti book that's somewhere across the desk that you look in all the technical data, we do have all of that directly accessible from the software, which is really nice. And I'm going to go back to Groutfield CMU really quick to show you that we also do have that load engine available in the Masonry module as well. Again, I can select static or seismic, can add in different tension and shear loads, a moment, enter, it'll do the factor, or it'll do the combinations for me. And of course, it shows me those loads that govern. I'm gonna remove this one really quick. I have the ability to import those loads from a spreadsheet again. I won't do that for right now though. I'll hide my load engine down. You will see on the left that you have the ability to input the anchor plate layout, either not only on the front of wall, but the top of wall and side of wall as well, which I know is a big deal because unfortunately our anchors don't always go to the face of the wall. Pretty slick. I have those exact same banners, just reduced on the left because I have fewer inputs. I have the anchor and the service load inputs, and that's what I got for PROFIS into Masonry. I mentioned earlier that we do have advanced hover bubbles. So if you hover your pointer over just about anything in the software, it'll give you a short description, and that little eye next to it will actually take you to our knowledge database if you need additional information. So now I show you our concrete over metal deck module, which I'm a very big fan of. And I mentioned earlier when I was speaking to Eric that there are additional headaches that may have to come with dealing with concrete over metal deck attachment, because you're not only comparing the ICC ESR of the anchor, but also that of the deck manufacturer. So what I have right now is it's defaulted to just a generic deck type, and I have the ability to put in custom geometry, which is huge. So every once in a while we have a project that an architect decides they need something very, very special. And what we end up getting is a custom deck that may be on our project. How do I compare that against, again, all those ICC ESR reports? So within the software, I can change all of the geometry to match that custom deck that I'm using in the field, and PROFIS Engineering will tell you whether or not the anchor that is currently being used has the appropriate, has been tested in those appropriate dimensions. If you're using a standard deck type, we have over 15 automatically entered into the software that you can just select, and everything is input for you. So 10 geometry checks have been included in the GUI and in the design checks, which is great. So I have the ability to have that in the lower or upper soffit, which is great. And I can move that anchor about within the upper soffit as well, which is pretty helpful because we know it's not always directly in the middle. And if I have my anchor in the top of the concrete over metal deck, I can add additional anchors if I have two. And then I have the ability to add a plate as well, which was an additional request we actually had after releasing the software. So I'm glad we were able to incorporate that sooner than later. Again, I can change all of my all of those different dimensional inputs directly onto the GUI. It's really nice and helpful. And I have a great interface to be actually able to see where my anchors are, kind of get an idea of where those may be. Specifically when I'm looking whether it's over or under the flute, that can always be really difficult if you're just trying to hand sketch it out. So again, I open up my anchor filter, I can exclude all the anchors that don't work, and I see exactly what my viable options are, and I can then select that specific anchor I want to design with. Can view the ICC ESR if I really want to go back and double check those geometry checks, because who doesn't have time and excitement for geometry checks? And with that, I will take us back home. So I hope you all have enjoyed our demonstration from the software. It's really, I like to think it's really easy to use. It's relatively intuitive. Eric and I were actually talking over lunch earlier, and we said, how was it getting used to the new software? Because change is always hard. And he said, it's just like anything. If you give it a fair shake, if you get in and play around with it, you figure things out, you learn from your mistakes, and then you have this awesome tool that hopefully that you've been able to tell from his conversation today has really been helpful in improving the accuracy and the efficiency and reducing the time that his team has on these different connection designs. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to questions. So Eric will go ahead and join us, and perfect. So some of the questions we have, let me go ahead. Sorry, we got a whole slew of them in here. Are there tutorials available to learn how to use the software? That's a fantastic question. So we actually do have a variety of webinars that are available on the Ask Hilti website. We also have tutorials that are coming in the next few months. We do have how-tos available on the Hilti YouTube channel. So we do have different tutorials that are currently available. I know there are more coming down the pipeline. If you do have additional questions at this time, I encourage you to always reach out to your Hilti field engineer in your area. So if you have any questions on how to do that or how to get in touch with that person, you can, I'm trying to think of what the email address is. You can actually email HNA, that's Harry, Nancy, Avery, technical services at hilti.com. If you email that address and say, you know what, I'd really like for a Hilti engineer to come in and teach my team how to use this software, we can actually set up a personal in-person training to where you guys get the training that you need. We have a great question about, so is the draft version updated every time, or are there multiple drafts saved for each project? So that's a great question. So you can house multiple drafts or multiple design within one project. So if you open up PROFIS Engineering and have not started on a specific connection, when you begin to design, whenever that software, if you time out of the software or if your browser gets X out of whatever else, that will be saved as an individual draft. You then, when you open up the software, have the opportunity to go back and open that old draft. Or if you began a new connection, that would save as a second draft. So I hope that was clear, but you can have multiple drafts. If you save a draft under a design folder name, multiple drafts, multiple designs, multiple connections under the same project. Oh, a great question I love to hear. For existing PROFIS Anchor user, how to update registration and transition to PROFIS Engineering Suite. So you can go directly to profisengineering.hilti.com right now. And you will have the ability to register if you are a first-time user. And if you are an existing PROFIS Anchor user, you can use your current credentials you use to download the software. If you have any questions on how to do that, again, I highly recommend using that same email address, HNA, that stands for Hilti North America, technical services, and I'm sorry, at hilti.com, and they can help you out as well. They can provide you some troubleshooting steps if you need that instruction. We have another great question. Is there a way to download the calculation file to my computer for backup? So hopefully that was asked a little bit earlier in the demonstration. So hopefully we answered your question. But yes, you do have the ability to download all of your .pe calculation files directly to your computer. Should you want to do that, you absolutely can do that. But you will have the additional functionality of having it saved to the cloud in case something happens to your desktop saved version. one more feature that's really helpful is that you do have the ability, in case you'd missed it earlier, to open old PROFIS anchor files. Those are back compatible with PROFIS Engineering, so you can open those up in the new software if you have to go into an old file from last year or the year before. Another question we have is, does the update to the various Hilti programs run parallel to the updates to the National Design Standards? Oh man, that's a loaded question. So we definitely do have software updates that happen when we do have design standard updates. But what happens more commonly and much more frequently is we have updated technical information. So for each anchor that's in PROFIS Engineering, we have an ICC report that proves compliance with the building code. And those ICC reports are only valid for a certain window of time, typically 2 years for anchors, although they can also be updated for 1 year. With all of the testing that goes into publishing those values and updating those ICC ESRs every 1 or 2 years, we continuously have a specific ICC report for each anchor and each base material. So for HY200, we would have one for concrete, both cracked and uncracked, and masonry base materials. So as those continuously updates and products have new technical data, we have to include that new data into the software. And there's tons of anchors in this software. So most of what you're seeing, most of those updates are actually not code-based. They're going to be per new tested information. And whether those values are lower or higher, you want to make sure you're using the right one for your design. Another question we have is there a validity period for the drafts? I mean, how long are the drafts available before moving them to a specific project? That's a great question. And as far as I'm aware, the answer is there isn't an expiration date. They will stay in there. I have been playing with the software since end of last year, and all of the drafts that I opened up then are still available. So I don't believe it times out on any specific period of time. Okay, and another question coming in is, can you have more than one width of brick in the design? Great question. That is absolutely something you can do. We do have valid technical information in 2 width and 3 width brick. So again, we only have that technical data for a certain number and different type of anchors. So when you go into the software and select either single width or multi-width brick, it will only show you the anchors that are valid because they have testing and published data for that specific base material. And I actually think, so we still have several other questions, but we are about out of time. So I think I will, I have one specific shout out that, thank you, Michael, for asking how to get to this this information directly. So we'll make sure you get that information. Again, any other additional questions that you have that you either weren't able to ask today or that you have in the future, please shoot us an email at HNA, that's Hilti North America, technicalservices@hilti.com, and our technical services engineering team will be happy to get you connected with those resources that you need. And with that, I'll turn it over to Beth.
Thank you, Alexis. I'm going to go back to screen share. I understand that at the beginning of the broadcast, I was not sharing my slides, so I do apologize about that. But, you know, it was typical housekeeping things, so kind of boring. Let's get it back over to me. Okay. Okay, so another reminder to download your certificate of completion now from the handout section. After downloading the certificate, please enter your name, print, and save a copy of the PDF. Note that the certificate will be available only during the remainder of this broadcast. If you do have issues, feel free to email me. It never fails that we usually have a couple of viewers who were not able to download it or find it. So if that's the case, don't hesitate to email me and I'll shoot it over to you. And if you missed our note at the beginning and you are watching the live webcast with a group on one person's computer, please download the multiple viewer registration form and complete and submit the form to receive credit. We need this information in case you are audited and we are contacted to verify this continuing education activity. Additionally, this webcast has been recorded and will be archived on csengineermag.com/continuing-education. A PDF will be available with written answers to all of the questions submitted during today's webcast. Again, please visit csengineermag.com/continuing education in 2 to 3 business days to view or download the complete Q&A for this webcast. And that about wraps it up. Again, I want to thank you, Eric, and you, Alexis, and all of the viewers for logging in today.